Chapter 1. The Forgotten Hallway. Lydia Williams never believed in ghost stories. As one of the top students at Westlake High, she considered herself logical, grounded, and practical. But there was something about the old, abandoned wing of the school that even she couldn't ignore. The air around it seemed thicker, the shadows longer, and an eerie silence clung to the corridor like a cold breath. The West Wing had been shut down for years. Stories circulated among students, claiming it was haunted, but Lydia dismissed them as silly rumors meant to scare freshmen. That was until she found the old map. It had been in the school's archives, buried beneath dusty files and forgotten documents. Lydia had been working on a history project when the yellowed, fragile paper caught her eye. It showed the original layout of the school, and to her surprise, there was an entire section that didn't exist anymore. Or, rather, it was hidden. Her curiosity sparked. She couldn't help but wonder why the wing had been sealed off. Theories ranged from asbestos contamination to accidents during construction, but none of them explained the whispers in the hall or the strange noises people claimed to hear when they got too close. It was late one afternoon when Lydia stood at the locked doors leading to the West Wing. Her best friend, Megan, had accompanied her, though reluctantly. "I don't know about this," Megan said, nervously pushing her hair behind her ear. "What if the stories are true?" "Ghosts don't exist," Lydia replied confidently, though a flicker of doubt gnawed at her. "We're just going to look. Nothing will happen." She fished the old key out of her pocket, which she had conveniently borrowed from the janitor's room earlier. It felt cold and heavy in her hand. With a deep breath, she inserted it into the lock. The door creaked open with an agonizing groan. Dust and stale air greeted them, along with the dim glow of the late afternoon sun through broken, cobweb-covered windows. The hallway stretched out before them, lined with old lockers, some rusted, others still intact. Faded posters clung to the walls, remnants of a time long past. "It's just an old part of the school," Lydia said, more to convince herself than Megan. But as they ventured deeper, the air grew colder, and an unsettling feeling settled in Lydia's chest. Megan shivered and glanced over her shoulder. "Let's hurry up and get out of here." As they walked down the hallway, Lydia noticed something strange. The lockers were all locked, except for one at the very end. Its door was slightly ajar, hanging loosely on its hinges. Without thinking, she reached for it. "Lydia, don't," Megan's voice was cut off as Lydia opened the locker. Inside was an old, tattered notebook. The leather binding was cracked with age, and the pages were yellowed. On the first page, written in an elegant yet hurried script, was a single name, Emily Grace. Lydia felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard that name before. "Emily Grace," Megan whispered, her eyes wide. "Isn't that the girl who disappeared?" Lydia nodded slowly. According to the stories, Emily Grace had been a student at Westlake High nearly 50 years ago. One day, she simply vanished. No one knew where she went or what happened to her. Some said she ran away, while others believed something more sinister had occurred. But now, holding her notebook, Lydia realized that Emily might not have disappeared at all. "We should leave," Megan said, her voice trembling. But Lydia was already flipping through the pages. They were filled with frantic, disjointed entries, describing strange happenings around the school. Emily wrote of shadows that followed her, voices that whispered in the dark, and a cold presence she could never escape. The last entry sent a shiver through Lydia's entire body. "They're coming for me. I can hear them. If anyone finds this, know that I didn't leave. I was taken. Beware the forgotten hallway." Just as Lydia finished reading, the air around them grew impossibly still. Megan gasped, pointing toward the far end of the hall. Lydia followed her gaze, and froze. There, standing in the shadows, was a figure. At first, it looked like just a trick of the light, but as it stepped forward, Lydia's heart pounded in her chest. The figure was that of a girl, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. It was Emily Grace. Chapter 2, Whispers in the Dark. Lydia and Megan stood frozen in place, Their eyes locked on the ghostly figure at the end of the hallway. Emily Grace, if that's who it was, didn't move closer, but her presence alone sent waves of terror through both girls. Megan tugged at Lydia's sleeve. "We need to leave. Now." Lydia nodded, unable to tear her eyes away from Emily. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and the cold seemed to seep into her bones. She took a step backward, pulling Megan with her, but as they turned to leave, a faint whisper echoed through the hallway. "Don't leave me." Lydia's heart skipped a beat. The voice was soft, desperate. She glanced back, expecting to see Emily gone, but the figure remained, her eyes locked on them. "What do you want?" Lydia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, there was no response. Then, as if carried by the wind, the voice came again, "Help me." Megan shook her head frantically. "This is crazy, Lydia. We can't help her. She's dead." Lydia knew Megan was right. This wasn't something they could fix. But the pleading look in Emily's eyes stirred something inside her. What if Emily had been trapped here, all this time? What if there was a way to free her? Before she could think too much about it, Lydia took a step forward. "How can we help you?" Emily didn't answer. Instead, the temperature in the hallway dropped even further, and a gust of icy wind rushed past them, rattling the old lockers. Lydia instinctively shielded her face, but when she looked up again, Emily was gone. The only sound was their heavy breathing and the distant hum of the school's heating system. "We need to go," Megan insisted, pulling at Lydia's arm. "This is too much." Lydia hesitated but finally nodded. "Let's get out of here." They hurried back toward the doors, their footsteps echoing eerily in the empty hallway. But as they reached the entrance, they discovered something that made Lydia's stomach drop. The door wouldn't budge. "What? Why isn't it opening?" Megan panicked, yanking at the handle. Lydia tried too, but it was as if the door had been welded shut. Panic started to rise in her chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. It was just an old, abandoned wing of the school. Nothing more. But now, trapped in the dark with no way out, Lydia began to realize that there was much more to the stories than she had ever believed. The whispers were real. The ghost was real. And now they had no choice but to find out why. Chapter 3, The Shadow's Grip. Lydia's hands shook as she frantically tried the door again. But it was useless. The heavy door stood immovable, as if mocking their panic. Megan was already hyperventilating, her eyes wide with fear as she backed away. "What are we going to do, Lydia?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "We can't be stuck here. What if we can't get out?" Lydia swallowed hard, trying to push down her own rising terror. "We'll figure it out. There has to be another way." She forced herself to stay calm, scanning the hallway for any other exits. Then she remembered the map. She pulled it out of her backpack, her fingers fumbling with the worn paper. The layout showed a door at the far end of the hall, one that led to a staircase. Maybe it was still accessible. "This way," Lydia said, her voice steadier than she felt. "There's another exit at the end of the hall." Megan followed without hesitation, the fear of staying in one place worse than whatever might be ahead. But as they moved deeper into the abandoned wing, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every step felt like a weight pressing down on them, the air thick with something unseen. A soft rustling sound came from behind them, like fabric brushing against the floor. Megan spun around, her eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" Lydia nodded, her throat tight. "Just keep moving," she urged, quickening her pace. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly before them, the dim light from the windows barely cutting through the darkness. As they neared the end of the hall, Lydia spotted the door to the stairwell. Relief surged through her. But then, the whispering began again. "Turn back." Lydia froze. The voice was faint, but it was enough to stop her in her tracks. She glanced at Megan, whose face had gone pale. "Lydia, please. Let's just go," Megan begged, her voice barely audible. But something compelled Lydia to listen. It wasn't Emily this time. The voice felt darker, colder, more insidious. She shook her head, trying to push the thoughts away. They needed to escape. The stairwell door was just a few feet away when something moved in the corner of Lydia's vision. She turned her head slowly, her heart racing. At the far end of the hallway, near the locker where they had found Emily's notebook, a shadow was shifting. It moved unnaturally, stretching and twisting as if it were alive. Lydia's breath caught in her throat. The shadow wasn't just a trick of the light, it was watching them. Megan followed Lydia's gaze and let out a choked sob. "What is that?" The shadow seemed to pulse, growing darker, more solid. And then, slowly, it began to move toward them. Lydia's body screamed at her to run, but her feet felt rooted to the floor. The shadow moved with purpose, like it had been waiting for them all along. "We have to go," Megan urged, pulling on Lydia's arm. Finally, Lydia snapped out of her trance and they bolted toward the stairwell door. Lydia grabbed the handle and yanked it open. They stumbled into the stairwell, slamming the door shut behind them. For a moment, they stood there, panting, their hearts pounding in their chests. "What was that?" Megan gasped, clutching her side as she tried to catch her breath. "I don't know," Lydia whispered, leaning against the cold wall. But deep down, she had a sinking feeling. Whatever it was connected to Emily Grace. And to the forgotten hallway. The stairs spiraled down into darkness. The air here was even colder, and it smelled of damp stone and mildew. But at least they were moving away from whatever had been stalking them. Lydia tried to focus. "We need to find a way out. Let's keep going down." They descended cautiously, the creaky stairs groaning beneath their weight. Each step felt like it could give way at any moment. When they finally reached the bottom, they found themselves in what seemed like a basement, a wide, dimly lit space filled with old desks, chairs, and discarded school supplies. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Megan moved cautiously toward a dusty window, trying to peer outside. "It's still sealed up," she muttered. "There's no way out from here." Lydia bit her lip. She was about to suggest going back up when something on the floor caught her attention. Among the debris and scattered papers was a series of faint, circular marks. Footsteps. They were too small to be recent, but too defined to have been made long ago. Megan followed her gaze. "What now?" she whispered. Lydia hesitated, then crouched down to examine the footprints more closely. They look like Emily's. She traced the marks with her hand. The prints seemed to lead toward a small door in the far corner, one she hadn't noticed before. "What do you think's behind there?" Megan asked, her voice wavering. Lydia didn't answer immediately. A part of her didn't want to know. But another part, the part that had led her to the West Wing in the first place, needed to find out. "We have to look," Lydia said quietly. "I think this is why we're here." Reluctantly, Megan nodded. They moved toward the door, the air growing heavier with each step. Lydia placed her hand on the doorknob. It was ice cold, and as she turned it, she heard that whisper again, louder this time. Turn back. Before it's too late. Ignoring the warning, Lydia opened the door. Chapter 4, The Secret Room. The door swung open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. It was barely more than a storage closet, but it was clear from the moment they stepped inside that this space was different. The walls were lined with old photographs and faded newspaper clippings, and at the center of the room was a large, wooden desk covered in dusty papers and files. Lydia's eyes were immediately drawn to a photograph pinned to the wall. It was Emily Grace. She was standing in front of the school, smiling brightly, but there was something off about the image. Her eyes seemed hollow, distant, as if she wasn't truly there. Megan shivered. "This place is so creepy. Why would Emily come down here?" Lydia moved closer to the desk, her fingers brushing across the papers. Many of them were old school records, but one stood out. It was a letter, dated the same year Emily disappeared. Underscore to whom it may concern. I have uncovered something dangerous in the West Wing. The things I've seen. I fear they will never let me leave. Underscore. The letter was unsigned, but Lydia knew it had to be from Emily. She found something, Lydia murmured. Something she wasn't supposed to. Before Megan could respond, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. The lights flickered, and that same shadow from the hallway seemed to bleed into the room, creeping in from the corners. Lydia's chest tightened. Whatever they had awakened, it wasn't done with them yet. Chapter 5, The Final Warning. The shadow seeped into the room, a swirling mass of darkness that seemed to pull the light and warmth out of the air. It moved with deliberate slowness, as if savoring the fear that clung to Lydia and Megan like a second skin. Megan backed away, her breath coming in short gasps. Lydia, we have to get out of here, now. But Lydia couldn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the shadow as it coalesced in front of them, taking shape. It wasn't just a mindless presence, it was aware, intelligent, and angry. For the first time, she understood the full weight of Emily Grace's words. Whatever had haunted the West Wing had taken Emily, and now, it was after them. The shadow loomed, its form shifting and writhing, but through the darkness, Lydia caught glimpses of something, someone, within it. A face, twisted in torment, flickered in and out of view. Emily. Megan let out a choked sob. We're not getting out of here, are we? Lydia swallowed hard, her throat tight with fear. We have to try. But even as she said it, she knew the truth. They had ventured too far into the forgotten secrets of the West Wing, and now there was no easy escape. Still, Lydia's mind raced, searching for a way out. The shadow pulsed again, its form twisting into something more recognizable. The outline of a figure emerged, and this time, it wasn't just a trick of the light. Emily Grace stood before them, her eyes hollow and her skin ashen, the once bright girl now consumed by the darkness that had claimed her. You shouldn't have come here, Emily's voice echoed, her tone a haunting whisper of what it once had been. It won't let you leave. Lydia's heart pounded in her chest. Emily, please. We just want to help. But Emily's eyes, or whatever remained of her, were empty, devoid of any hope or recognition. The entity controlling her, the shadow that had consumed her, had no intention of letting them go. You're too late, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's always too late. Megan screamed, the terror too much to bear, and bolted for the door. Lydia called out after her, but Megan was already gone, her footsteps echoing in the hallway outside. For a moment, Lydia was paralyzed with indecision. Follow Megan and risk the unknown, or stay and try to confront whatever this entity was. But as the shadow began to close in, pressing against her chest like a vice, the choice was made for her. She turned and ran. Lydia's legs moved on instinct, her feet barely touching the ground as she sprinted out of the room and down the dark corridor. The oppressive feeling of the shadow seemed to chase her, closing in from all sides. She could hear Megan's frantic footsteps ahead, the only thing guiding her through the maze of darkness. The hallways twisted and stretched, as if the building itself was alive and working against them. The way out seemed impossibly far, and the cold, whispering presence of the shadow lingered behind them, closer with every step. Then, up ahead, a faint light appeared, the stairwell. Megan had already reached it, her hand gripping the door as she pulled it open with all her strength. Lydia! Megan cried, her voice desperate. Hurry! Lydia pushed herself harder, her legs burning as she raced toward the door. She could feel the icy fingers of the shadow reaching for her, but she didn't look back. With a final burst of energy, she dove through the door, slamming it shut behind her. The stairwell was bathed in dim light, a sanctuary compared to the darkness they had just fled from. They didn't stop. The girls barreled down the stairs, the heavy thuds of their footsteps echoing through the empty stairwell. It wasn't until they reached the main floor, gasping for breath, that they finally paused. The oppressive feeling of the shadow was gone, but the memory of it clung to them, a reminder of what they had narrowly escaped. Lydia leaned against the wall, her legs trembling from exhaustion. What? What was that? Megan panted, her face pale and streaked with tears. What did we do? Lydia shook her head, still trying to process everything. I don't know, she whispered. But it's connected to Emily. It has to be. Megan wiped her face with the back of her hand. We have to tell someone. The school, the police, someone needs to know. But as Lydia stood there, the weight of what they had uncovered pressing down on her, she realized something with chilling clarity: no one would believe them. The West Wing, Emily Grace, the shadow, it was all part of a history that had been buried for a reason. We can't, Lydia said quietly, her voice hollow. No one would understand. They'd just think we were crazy. Megan stared at her, wide-eyed. So, what are we supposed to do? Just forget? Lydia looked back toward the stairwell, the door still slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness leaking out. No, she said, her voice firm. We won't forget. But we can't stay here. The girls exchanged a silent understanding. Whatever had happened in the West Wing was far from over, but for now, all they could do was leave. They turned and walked out of the school, the setting sun casting long shadows on the ground. As they stepped outside, the oppressive weight lifted, but Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow was still watching them, lingering just beyond the edge of their sight. And deep down, she knew the truth: the West Wing's secrets were far from buried. They had only just begun to unravel.